Hey ho, let's go. How you doing, Jace?
Doing pretty good, man. Doing pretty good here on a Friday afternoon, and I don't know. It's not a bad day for us, I think.
Good. I'm just feeling like a good day for us. I wonder if we're broadcasting live on these platforms or if you and I are just talking to ourselves.
Talking to each other.
We're supposed to be on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. We had problems with Twitter and LinkedIn. LinkedIn we gave up on, but we're supposed to be live on Twitter right now.
Yeah, nobody's on the way. Only a couple 100 million people.
There's only a couple 100 million people on Twitter. I wonder how, let's see if we go to my profile, can I see it? Hey, fuck, we're live on Twitter. That's a miracle. Hey, Jamie J, you made a miracle happen. We are live on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. Can you believe that?
How about that? Jamie is a master.
He is a master. And it brings up an interesting point, doesn't it, Jace? That sort of the playing field has been leveled for people who are content creators. It doesn't matter whether you're NBC, CNBC, NPR, Fox News, or a couple of dudes. It really has been leveled, hasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, we can run a TV studio out of our house, or in my case, the garage. So
yeah. All right. Well, I don't know if this is going to work, if I'm going to be able to see the questions or not. I hope so. I hope this fucking works. If you have questions, are they supposed to put them in the comments?
I do believe
if you put them in the comments, we'll see them. And many of you have been emailing us questions to blackhole@lockhead.com. So we have questions to get to. But so joining me today, for those of you who don't know, is the legendary, the living podcast legend himself, Jason DeFilippo.
Thank you very much, sir. Pleasure to be here.
It's great to have you, Jace. And one of the things I wanted to tell you guys, we could talk a little bit about podcasting today. So we always like to talk about podcasting, and it's time to start a podcast. But one of the things I just want to say off the top in public, Jason, is you are the OG. And my evidence that you are the OG goes like this. Every major podcast now pretty much is a internet-based podcast.
Yeah, nobody's in the studio.
Nobody's got a recording studio, right? So if I pick on one of my favorites, and one of the legends, Terry Gross, Fresh Air, NPR. It's one of the biggest podcasts in the world. And there's this expression that I'm going to have one of those days today, I think. My brain is kind of mushy. I need to warn you.
COVID brain sitting in?
I'm getting a little COVID brain, yeah. Warren Buffett says, when the tide goes out, you can see who's swimming naked. And the thing I think that's interesting right now is if you compare a recent episode of Follow Your Different or Lockhead on Marketing, and certainly Grumpy Old Geeks, compared to a recent episode over the internet of Terry Gross from NPR, who's got the greatest technology you could possibly imagine and the greatest editors and producers you could possibly imagine. And you'll notice it's fantastically interesting which podcasts sound better.
Well, we've got a little more experience than they do. I mean, they're used to their $1 million studios. We're used to a laptop and some software and, flying by the seat of our pants. We got to make it sound good. They, once you take away their studio, they just don't know what to do.
They don't know what to do. And you do. And I was talking to the guys, so to get to a question on should you start a podcast, which we can get to. I was talking to the Squadcast guys yesterday, and we use exclusively for remote internet-based episodes, squadcast.fm, and they're great entrepreneurs, inspiring entrepreneurs with an amazing product. And I think they told me their business was up 800% in April, if I remember right.
Oh, I'm surprised it's that little. I figured it would be even more than that.
Wow.
I know. I've been screaming from the mountaintops about these guys for a long time now. They've got a fantastic product. I mean, if you're recording over the internet, they're my go-to now. I love those guys.
And so the interesting thing is, in great part because of them, the quality of a internet-based podcast, we now have the ability to be with them almost as high quality, in my opinion, to the layman ear, of which I have,
Mhm.
very close to a studio podcast.
Absolutely, and then if you just process the stuff through some, uh, movie grade software like we do, then you definitely sound like you're in the studio. But,
Well,
I mean, in the old
I
days.
told those guys they were part of it, and you were the secret weapon.
No, man, it's those guys get so much credit. They've really done a fantastic job with the software and iterating on it. Taking feedback from podcasters. I love what they've built so far. It's rock solid. Have not had any problems in a very long time. I mean, once it came out of beta, we were all good.
Yep.
Even like it's always beta days, and people remember the beta days for a lot of these things, and don't give them a try again because they're like, oh, I had a bad experience once, and it's like, no, man, give them another shot, because right now that platform is the go-to platform for me and any show that I work with.
And I'm happy to say, and I don't have any economic stake in the matter, so just for the record, but I think they are the emerging category king in sort of professional grade podcast recording and production over the internet. Is that if I'm the marketing guy, and that's my opinion, but you're the geek, you're the guy who technically knows. You think that's possible for those guys?
Oh, absolutely. Right now, they're at the top of the heap. I've tried every other platform out there, and consistently, they are, when it comes to recording a professional sounding podcast, giving you the options and the switches and the doodads and the goo-gaws for a professional producer. Um, I'm never going to anybody else. So, yeah, Rock and Zach, you guys rock, and Zach.
We did get a question, Jace, from Keyshawn S, an email that said, "Should we start a podcast now?" And the reality is, you're more sort of qualified to answer that question probably than I am. But I hear this a lot, like, "Oh, everybody's doing a podcast. Oh, it's the pandemic, so everybody's starting a podcast. Oh, there's over 1 million podcasts. How could we possibly have a successful podcast? Podcasting's over." So I know what my opinion is, which I'm happy to share. But what's your thoughts to those sorts of comments?
The only reason to not start a podcast right now is because it's damn impossible to find a microphone. Microphones are sold out everywhere. That is the biggest hurdle right now to starting a podcast. I say if you've ever had the itch to start a podcast, you have the time right now. Do it. Absolutely. There's no barrier to entry. Anybody can do it, and I think that it's worth a shot. Who am I to say no to anybody that wants to try it out? And I look at podcasting, the more people that are podcasting, rising tide lifts all boats. Because you're going to know people that have never listened to a podcast before, which means that you are going to be out there beating the drum, teaching people how to listen to podcasts, which means in the future, I can steal them from you, and then they become my listener.
Well, it's fun.
People listening to shows,
It's funny you say that, because this week I had a conversation with a guy, a very serious CEO, incredible career, and he told me that up until this week he had never heard a podcast, and I said, "Wow." He said, "Yeah, my son's been telling me for years I should listen to a podcast, but whatever, and I never got to it, and so I finally listened to a podcast." And he said, "I'm a ham radio operator, and I expected it to sound like shit." And so I said, "Well, what podcast did you listen to?" And he said, "Yours." And I said, "Well, excellent answer." And he started with the McChrystal episode.
Mm-hmm.
And the first thing he said to me, Jace, not to tickle your tickleables in public too much, but he said, "I could not get over how great it sounded. I expected it to sound like a ham radio conversation, and it sounded amazing." And then he gave me a bunch of nice compliments and said some nice things about McChrystal. But this week I recruited one new person to the category.
Excellent. Yeah, I mean, not everybody listens to podcasts yet. So that's why I want more podcasters out there, because they're gonna be beating the drum and bringing people to us. So, and it's fun. I mean, you got to admit, podcasting is just a blast. There's nothing like it. And granted, I want to put this caveat out for everybody. You're going to suck at the beginning. It's going to be terrible unless you have some kind of media training. You practice, you practice, you practice, you practice. I tried to put this into perspective for people when we started Grumpy Old Geeks. We did 40 episodes, which took us almost a year. And each of those episodes were an hour long. And so if you put that together into one streaming thing, that's like one work week of actual content produced. So even after 40 episodes, that's 1 week's worth of, actually being on the job. So how do you think you're going to be after 1 week on the job? You got to put in the time and you got to learn how to do it. And the resources are out there right now. It has never been easier to start a podcast. It is harder to find a place to learn how to start a podcast because there's so many of them now. But I think it's a great time because, everybody's stuck inside still. And if you're not stuck inside, be stuck inside unless you have to do it for your job. You should be sequestered like the rest of us. And I think you use that time to your advantage.
Well, it's interesting that you say that. As you well know, we just had Christopher Ryan, legendary PhD, author, podcast guru guy, been on the Rogan podcast a bunch of times. He wrote Sex at Dawn, et cetera, et cetera. And he said at the early days of the pandemic, I'm going to increase my content production because, to your point, people are at home. The other thing I find, and so Jamie J is in the comments here. He says, how many websites are there compared to how many podcasts are out there? Exactly. Mm-hmm. And the other one I say, Jamie, is I look to music. One of my favorite new artists is this gal, Lizzo. My wife turned me on to her, and I think she's sassy and fun, and she's in my opinion, a whole new genre. She's a melange of all kinds of things, and she sounds great, and I think she's incredibly creative. Blah blah. Anyway, nobody said to Lizzo, "Hey, Lizzo, Paul McCartney's the greatest songwriter in history. He sold a bazillion records. He holds every songwriting record there ever is. He's the Wayne Gretzky, Muhammad Ali of songwriting and being in a band and all that. So you shouldn't record your new record."
Yeah, it's already been done. There's enough music already finished. We've reached the end of the line. No more.
We've reached the end of the line. Now, feel free to post your comments or questions if you've got them. And Jason, why don't we dig back into the mailbag? So we could talk podcasting for 12. We could do a 12-hour series on podcasting.
Easily. So let's go to the first question from Andrew H. He says, can you talk about creativity under pressure?
Yeah, this was interesting. He posted this question, if I remember right, in our Facebook group when we first started to talk about the Podstorm. And I assume by under pressure, he means, a situation like maybe a global pandemic.
Possibly. I'm thinking maybe just deadlines. Maybe not so much pandemic for the general person. Deadlines. What do you think about that?
Yeah, well, I think the biggest thing of being creative quickly, I assume urgency is part of this, is I think Gladwell was right with sort of the blink thing, right? So what's the question? What's the thing we're trying to be creative about? And what's the first idea? Write that down. And I like to think out loud, particularly when I'm with other smart people who I respect and admire. And so I often find myself saying stuff like, look, I don't know if I agree with myself, but the first thing that popped in my head was this, right? And it's to throw ideas out and play with them. And so I like to, when asked a question, I like to spontaneously jump and start banging it around with smart people. What do you do when you have to produce something creative quickly, Jace?
Oh man, it's you just start writing things down. If you don't have anybody to bounce it off of, then you just start writing down ideas, doing ideas. The more, the merrier. It's one of those things. I was taking a comedy class with Scott Dickers, the guy who founded The Onion. And he's like, the way to write great comedy is to write a lot of bad comedy. So the way to have a lot of great ideas is to have even more bad ideas. So you just keep coming up with ideas until you hit one that actually you go, that's the one I need.
And what made you decide to take a comedy class right now during the pandemic?
It's one of those things where I needed something new to do, and I it's relevant to my interests. I love comedy. I've never been a comedian per se, but I just love the art, and I wanted to learn something new and see if I could get any tips and tricks for my other podcast, which sometimes is funny, sometimes is not, but I would like it to be more funny. So why not take a class? I like to learn from the best, so I took a class with one of the best.
This brings up an interesting thing around creativity because I hear this a lot. I know what I think about it, but I'm curious what you think about it. Oh, you're so talented, funny. You're either born funny or you're not. You're either funny or you're not. You're either creative or you're not, et cetera, et cetera. But yet you're taking a class on being funny. So I thought you are either funny or you're not. Can you really be taught to be funny, Jace?
Absolutely. Anything can be put into a formula. And Scott has actually built out a formula for comedy. And if you follow the process, you can write funny stuff. You can get a job on a TV show writing funny stuff, and think about it. In college, they had creative writing class. Well, if you weren't born creative, why would you need a creative writing class? Because you were born with it. No, you took a class to learn how to write creatively. Anything can be taught. It's not, I mean, some people are naturally funny, but some people can learn and be funny on their own just by going through the process and learning from funny people. What did that funny person do? Why is that person funny? And then you learn from multiple people and then you build your own style. You take in all of the inputs, mash it together in your head, and out comes something hopefully new and funny or creative.
I just think it's asinine to say that you can't be taught something creative. A lot of things I've been taught in the creative realm. Some of them I had natural quote unquote talents or inclinations towards whatever, but in some cases I don't. Most notably for me, as you know, I have dysphaglia, right? Dyslexic and dyscalculia, which is dyslexia for math, and I have all these fucking things, right? And are you ADHD?
No, I am slightly dyslexic though. I've had that my whole life. So
Yeah.
no, ADHD was never my thing. I was a skateboarder.
Like it's something you
Yeah,
attach onto.
that crowd, I think you had the metal heads, you had the ADHD kids. I went with the skaters. You had the popular kids, the drama kids. I just stuck with skating.
Well, anyway, my point is, I have learned to write, and as a dyslexic, writing is very hard. Reading is very hard, and I've learned to be a better reader, and I've learned to be a writer. I've written a couple books, and you know what? I'll just say it. It's on my mind. It may sound immodest, but what the fuck? When I was a kid coming up, Jace, I read HBR religiously, starting at like 18, 19 years old. When I discovered the Harvard Business Review, I was enamored with it. And of course, I didn't have an MBA and I got thrown out of high school. And so it was an incredible learning tool. And if you had asked me when I was 18, 19 years old, or if you had told me that I would be published in the HBR multiple times, thanks to my buddy Eddie Yoon, I wouldn't probably have believed you. And so I guess my point is, if a guy like me can be taught to write, then I'm with you. I just don't buy that creative things can't be taught. And I think we can be creative fast. It's weird. Often the first idea is the best idea.
I think it is, but it needs tweaking. It's always like you can get the kernel out there from the first idea, that your snap judgment, and then you massage it. You workshop it. You figure it out as you go along. But you just have to do the process. It's not like nothing comes out fully formed, I think.
Yeah,
in general,
I think that's right.
Yeah.
I think that's right. But I at least in my experience, particularly with marketing and category design, often the first idea is directionally right, and then you have to sort of water it. And we had quite a while ago now, we had Safi Bakal on Follow Your Different. He's written this awesome new book called Loon Shots. He's been winning all these awards, and it's a great, great book. But one of the things he says in there that I find interesting is that sort of new ideas, breakthrough ideas, are very fragile in the hothouse, and they sort of have to be protected because it's very easy to shit on a big new creative idea, particularly if it comes up quickly. There's something about a big idea that happens quickly that people want to dismiss if it didn't look like you worked hard enough to come up with it.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And also, good ideas are different, and people don't like different out of the gate. They're like, "Oh no, we they're going to apply their history onto your idea, and you have to like break through that barrier and say, "No, this is why this is a good idea. Don't just crap on my ideas out of the gate. You have to fight for them." I think because in software, I would come up with ideas all the time. They're like, "No, that's not going to work. That's not going to work." The first person that says no, that's not going to work with a knee jerk reaction without thinking about it, that's the guy you get out of the room. That's the guy you don't want in a creative process. You have to be able to put things down and feel like you're in a safe space where you can cultivate those ideas and make sure that they have a little room to grow and grow on the people that you're selling them to.
Yeah, that's exactly right. All right, what else do we have in the old mailbag?
All right, Helen B says, "How long should a lightning strike last?"
I love this question. Because some people say to me, well, hey man, we're working on our lightning strike, and we think it's going to take place over about 6 months. Like, well, if it's 6 months, it's not a lightning strike.
Yeah, let me explain. Let me explain.
And so I think the answer is anywhere from a day to a week. I think if it's more than a week, it's probably not a real lightning strike. And so I think you really want to get it focused. And sort of the key tenets of a lightning strike are maximum impact in minimum time, and it's predicated on the premise that you can't peanut butter your marketing, right? So what happens is most people spread their marketing somewhat equally across the calendar if there's multiple product lines or this and that. And I love this expression. You either rise above the noise or you're part of the noise. And so if you peanut butter too much of your marketing, you're gonna fall into the noise. It's just what happens, particularly today. And so what you're doing with a strike is you're trying to stand out and you're trying to be undeniable to your target audience when you strike. And look, there's some companies that can afford to do things a little bit longer, maybe 2 weeks at the outset. But for the most part, a strike is centered around a few days to about a week. Have you ever done a lightning strike for Grumpy Old Geeks?
Not really. No. I need to hire you to come in and help us out with that one.
Yeah, well, I got a deal for you on that one. My friend Eddie says you should have two prices. You should have extremely expensive and free.
All right, we'll take the latter. We'll take the free version. We get the free option. All right, our next question comes from Alice G. How do we come up with a tagline?
Oh, I love this question. So, I think what's happened with taglines over time, Jace, is Nike, of course, has the most famous tagline in the world. I don't have to tell you what it is. You know it. We all know it. It's on zillions of T-shirts and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And after Nike did that, which I believe is more than 20 years old, maybe even be 30 now, every company in the world said, "Oh, we need a tagline." And the vast majority of taglines are complete bullshit. And the reason they're bullshit is there's some meaningless thing. And most importantly, they do not tie often to the brand, but even worse, the category. And legendary taglines are representative of a point of view centered around the category. And I'm going to embarrass you if I can. I think
Be my guest. Well, I'm here. It's what you pay me for.
I think that you and Brian with Grumpy Old Geeks might have the most legendary tagline in podcast history. So, hey, play a little of the Grumpy Old Geeks music.
Grumpy Old Geeks, a weekly talk show hosted by Brian Schulmeister and Jason DeFilippo, discussing the finer points of what went wrong on the internet and who's to blame.
That's
There's
a
the tagline.
legendary tagline. So can you repeat it in case people didn't catch it?
What went wrong on the internet and who's to blame?
That's legendary, right? Because what's going on with that? It is descriptive of the product, right? It's deeply tied to the product, and it's both grumpy and funny at the same time, which is what the show is, right? And so what went wrong on the internet and who's to blame is a legendary tagline because it represents the POV of the product. So when you hear a product called Grumpy Old Geeks, and then you hear a tagline, what went wrong on the internet and who's to blame, you know what the fuck's coming on the podcast, don't you?
Pretty much. And the interesting thing about that is I came up with the tagline first, and then Brian came up with the title of the show. I'm like, because when I went to him and I'm like, I need a podcast host. I want to start a podcast. Our 4-hour epic rant at the bar are something that we would just go have beers and a sandwich. And I'm like, okay, you're my guy. I've known him for a very long time. And then I'm like, okay, what's the show going to be about? And then I came up with that. And then we went from the tagline to the product and then the branding on the product and moved from there. So we kind of went backwards, I think, on our tagline.
That's interesting and your tagline, like many legendary taglines, is actually a point of view. And so you had the centering point of view, and it's a real point of view, is a true north. And so you had a centering true north for what you wanted to do with the podcast, and you expressed that POV in the tagline. And then, interestingly enough, that informed the brand, which is proof positive, in my opinion, that natural, intuitive category designers think that way, because the category is about the customer and the brand is about us or our product or in this case, our podcast. And so the tagline, and I'm going to use this word very much on purpose, differentiates the product. It makes you unique in a way that stands out. And so if you're building a tagline, centering it on a point of view that is an expression of sort of the differentiation you're trying to achieve in the market. So like in the software business, one of the greatest taglines of all time, of course, is Mark Benioff at Salesforce.com, no software. And they had a bug for it, right? Those words with a red circle and a line through it. I'm sure you remember. And that was a provocative point of view that was also creating a category that got, in the beginning, was called, I think in the beginning it was just called software as a service. And then, of course, it became cloud. But so a legendary tagline is really grounded in a differentiating point of view. And I'll go a step further. A legendary tagline forces choice, not comparison. So a lot of marketers fall into the mistake of driving a comparison. And you see this on every local television ad for a car dealer. Come on down this weekend. And we got red ones and green ones, and we won't be undersold, and we got the best service, and they're barking all this stupidity at you, none of which is differentiating at all. And so what they're forced to compete on is comparison around price, primarily, of course, and service, and to some degree, right? And so they're all interchangeable. They're all indistinguishable. And that's why they're transaction businesses, not relationship businesses. Companies that are highly differentiated don't speak that way. They speak in a point of view that is very differentiating, that is very different. And most importantly, they're not trying to force a comparison. They're trying to force a choice. When you declare the podcast's tagline and name, it's a very clear choice. People are going to be attracted to that, or they're going to be repelled from it. It's hard to be indifferent to it.
Yeah. A lot of people are repelled by it. Trust me. It's but the people that like it, like it. And speaking on differentiation, that's exactly what we were trying to do. The market at that time, when we started out, Twit, This Week in Tech, was the big dog. We're like, how can we be different from Twit? Well, when you listen to Twit, they're talking about how great technology is all the time. This is fantastic. This is the new whatchamacallit. in the who's a bobber and the dubaflachi, and we're like, well, that sucks. That sucks. That's not going to work. And we just always pull out the BS, and they're all family friendly. So we want to just flip it on its head and say, okay, this is what's wrong with technology, and we're going to talk to adults like adults. And that was how we differentiated ourselves in the tech podcast space. That's what we were really trying to go for, was a complete, just kind of game change on what was out there at that time, because nobody was out there doing what we were doing when we started it.
Well, and that's what a legendary tagline does. Hey, Bradley, we're wishing you a legendary day too. You started off by saying aloha to us. I'm wondering, if you're still there, are you in Hawaii, or are you Hawaiian, or are you trying to get your aloha spirit on, or whatever else? All right, Jace, do we have anything else in the question bag that we still have time to get to?
Yes, we do. Brittany H writes, when is a good time to launch a new category?
That's sort of like asking the question, when's a good time to go fishing? So look, I think it would be silly not to acknowledge the importance of timing and, to some degree, the importance of luck. I remember we've had Eric Yuan, the founder of Zoom, on a couple times, and on Follow Your Different. And I can't remember which time it was, but in one of our visits, he said that the timing for Zoom was sort of plus or minus perfect, right? The cloud had got to a place where it had achieved a high level of critical mass and acceptance. Same thing with mobile. And so the world was ready for a mobile cloud-first communication alternative to the stuff that had been built pre that. And as you might remember, he was the head of engineering at WebEx. So he was, he understood generation one of that technology very well. And at WebEx, he identified the fact that because of mobile and because of the cloud, there was a way to kind of really reimagine this thing and move the category forward. And when they didn't let him do that at WebEx, he said, all right, well, I'm out of here. I'm going to do it on my own. But my point is, he stressed the importance of the timing, that had he been a whole lot earlier, it might not have worked. And had he been later, somebody else probably would have got there. So I think it is worthy of taking note. What are the mega trends around me that I think I can take advantage of to build this new category? And before I get to the next part, I want to ask you, Jace. I mean, you've been involved on the engineering side with a number of these, and I don't know, kick me under the table if you don't want to talk about it. But the other day, you and I were talking about the difference between Digg and Reddit, and why Reddit succeeded at a scale that Digg never did. Do you want to talk maybe a little bit about things like that?
Yeah, I mean, Digg had a lot of different issues with they were early to the game, and they kind of defined the space on what it was like to have crowdsourced headlines. And the problem that they had were algorithmic problems, because nobody had ever done these types of problems before. And then when Reddit came along, they saw all the problems that they had there. And then eventually, when Digg finally they were down on the ground, like saying, "Oh, somebody kicked me in the knee," they just came in and stole their lunch and ran out the back door. So they were at the right place at the right time, because Digg was having problems, and they came in with a simpler solution, which I still can't quite comprehend, but I guess I'm too old, and just stole all their users, stole all the power users, and said, "Hey, Digg's not treating you right. Come on over here." And at that point, Digg had been beaten down so many times and had so many failures with their algorithms and people gaming the system, that it was just the right time for Reddit to come in and say, "Hey, we're going to take over now." And Digg never recovered from it.
Yeah. And so I think there's an element of timing that is really important in this. However, a big part of what category design is about is making it your time. And it's about moving the world from a current sort of set of thinking, particularly around a problem or an opportunity, to your way of thinking around that problem or opportunity. And if you do that effectively, you can, and the distinction here is go from capturing demand to creating demand. Ultimately, that's what we're trying to do with category design. So I think awareness of the sort of environment and mega trends that may affect you really matter. If you look at Zoom, if you look at our friends at Squadcast, they could have never planned for this kind of level of growth. Zoom went from 10 million last year to 300 million now. And it's probably over that even more. And Mike Maples on a recent episode of Follow Your Different was talking about how indiscriminate this recession has been, that I think he used the term hand of God, that, some companies have, if you take Zoom as one example and Airbnb as another example, through no fault of their own on either side, one company has been massively advantaged and one company has been crushed, right? And so there's an element of the dynamics that matter. But all that said, category design is about making it your time. And if you have a provocative and engaging point of view, and you're particularly able to evangelize the problem or the opportunity in a way that gets that problem or opportunity to tip, to get people's attention, then it's sort of always a good time. So if you're aware of the meta trends, you're trying to be sensitive to your timing, and you think the timing feels right, and you're using the techniques of particularly category and point of view marketing, you can aid, if you will, in making it your time. All right, Jace, is there anything else?
That's it. We are dry on the mailbag this time, so time to call it a day.
All right. Hey, Bradley, got your note here. It says you work for a nonprofit and a co-creator at Ohana, spreading the aloha spirit to the world. We sure need a lot of aloha spirit, don't we, Jace?
No doubt, especially today.
All right. Well, I want to thank everybody for your time and attention. And hey, Jace, I'm so glad you're here. Oh, we got a little love note coming in from Bradley. Love your thinking, Christopher. Really enjoyed Play Bigger. And I'm using category design on Eagle Vision. Stoked to hear that, Bradley. Thank you. And we have a big announcement coming up about Play Bigger soon. We're going to have our 4th anniversary of when the book came out. And we recently got some news. But what I will say about that is thank you, Bradley, for reading Play Bigger. And thank you to everybody who has read either our books. And there's been some people sharing Play Bigger at scale. And we're going to do a big thank you coming up soon. But I really appreciate it. Any fun plans for the weekend, Jace?
Work. We're in the middle of a Podstorm, man. We got stuff to do.
Oh, you mean you're going to be editing Podstorm episodes?
I do believe. Have me a nice cocktail and make the pods. That's what we do.
Well, I really appreciate you being here. You're a legend. I think you're the greatest podcast producer of all time. And thanks for hanging out today. And thanks for everybody. Thanks for your questions. If you have more questions, keep them coming in. Send them to blackhole@lockhead.com. And during the Podstorm, every Wednesday at 11:30 Pacific time in our Facebook group, we're going to be doing these questions and answer sessions, and we'll be taking your questions over email as well.
You said, don't you mean Fridays?
Did I say Wednesday? Like I said, Jace, well, why don't you tell them?
Every Friday at 10:30, we'll be doing Q&As for the next 2 weeks.
I'm glad you're here. And hey, giant shout out to the legendary Jamie J for getting us set up on, we're using a technology to be live on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube called StreamYard. And Jamie J, our technical lead on a lot of legendary shit around here. Thank you. Thank you so much, Bradley. Hey, Eric Hunley is with us, Jace.
Hey, Eric, what's shaking? Get back to work. It's only 3 in the afternoon over there. I'm telling you,
don't you have some podcast episodes of Unstructured you should be working on there, Eric?
Seriously, get back to editing, man.
And for those of you who don't know Eric Hunley, he's a legendary podcast host, one of my favorite dialogue podcasts, Eric Hunley Unstructured. All right, we're out of here, Jace. Follow your different, stay legendary, and spread podcasts, not viruses.
Have a good one, man.